Good day and welcome to Constitutional Studies Week 3. This week, we enter the constitutional text. In previous weeks, we're focused on some background questions on constitution making and the purposes of a constitution. This week, we will begin our reading of the Constitution of India 1950 with the place that we should start, the preamble. In week 1 and week 2, we covered some preliminary background that is essential for an understanding of the Constitution of India. In week 1, we focused on the tension between a majoritarian democracy and a constitution. In particular, we asked, how can a constitution maintain the democratic rules of the game? We explored at some length why there is a need for a neutral body of rules that can contain a deeply divided society or a society with deep political and moral disagreements. How can such a society agree to a common set of rules and the need for that process? We can't leave that process entirely to democratic voting, because democratic voting under various conditions requires some basic frameworks. In week 2, we focused on constitution making. If we indeed need to make a constitution that plays this role as the neutral body of rules, how and who can make such a constitution, and how should we make such a constitution? We looked at the Indian experience, looking at the Constituent Assembly and the deliberative and consultative processes that resulted in the Constitution of India 1950. That completed the first 2 weeks of the course. In this week, we begin our inquiry into the constitutional text. Constitution of India 1950, and many of you would know this, begins with a preamble. The preamble, as in recent times, has become an object of considerable public attention. People consider the reading of the preamble as a mark of constitutional allegiance, much like the national anthem or the national flag. Why does the preamble evoke such an emotional connection? What is in that preamble and what does it mean? That is the purpose of this week's lecture. Let's get started. In part 1 of this lecture, I will focus on the purpose and the history of the preamble. Oftentimes, we tend to think that documents like the Constitution of India were somehow contrived and put together by some kind of historical accident. As I've suggested in week 2 of this course, it is quite the opposite. This is a closely deliberated and closely drafted constitution where every word is chosen carefully. Moreover, the choice of words and the choice of ideas has a long prehistory. Not just the history of constitution drafting in the Constituent Assembly between 1947 and 1950, but a history going back in some cases 30, in some cases 50, 70, or more than 100 years in time. And so we need to understand how the choices we made have come to be crystallized in the Constitution in a historical context. So let's begin, though, by outlining what might be considered some very preliminary questions on the purposes of a preamble. On the right of the screen in the slide, you would notice, as I've said before, a beautifully calligraphed version of the original preamble of India. And we are going to, no, this is not the original preamble of India. This is the current preamble of India. We're going to spend some time reading how we came to this current preamble and reading the bare text of the preamble. But how should we think of the preamble to the Constitution of India? Is it merely a preface, or an introduction to a book? Is that the way we should think about it? In most prefaces to a book, the author would tell you why they came to write the book, what support they received, and acknowledge debts of gratitude. An introduction to a book might go further. It might outline the broad contours of a book, main ideas of the book, and outline both the intellectual, social, or political background that lies behind the writing of the book. The preamble seems to fuse both the ideas of a preface as well as an introduction. The Indian constitution is not very historically self-conscious in ways that we're going to discuss shortly, but it nevertheless operates as a guiding post to the rest of the constitution to follow. It sets out, that is, the preamble sets out, primarily 4 or 5 key items. It sets out the goals and ideals that the framers seek to achieve through the constitution. What kind of political society do they want to constitute in India? What values must drive this political society? We also learn from the preamble a broad description of the nature of the state that India will come to be. Will it be a socialist state? Will it be a democratic state? Will it be a republic or a dominion state? These are all questions that are considered and settled by the preamble. The preamble also sets out some key fundamental values of this society. Values that are animated by the specific articles of the Constitution to follow, but also values that capture and broadly describe where the Constitution makers thought India was going and the values that had been embraced by the freedom movement. Many suggest that the preamble sets out the purposes of the Constitution, and it's not entirely clear that that description, that these are the binding purposes of the Constitution, is the best way to understand the preamble. But there is some historical evidence, especially in the Constituent Assembly, that some other members, influential, important members, may have had a similar thought. So let us get started with the text of the Constitution by reading the preamble as we find it today. The page, which is a part of the slide, reads like this: the Constitution of India. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. The preamble read in this way already gives us some insight into what is to follow. It is clear from the opening words of the preamble that the actors behind the Constitution of India are we the people. I'll have something more to say about why we the people. But it also, when we move directly to the last paragraph, we recognize that is we the people do something in our Constituent Assembly. So there's no fudge there, there's no pretense that the people have somehow come together and acted in a special way. They have done what they have done in the Constituent Assembly. They have created a particular kind of Indian political entity, political entity called India, for a particular, one might say, purpose, to secure to all its citizens. So the kind of entity being created in India, political entity, is sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, and a republic. And it secures to all its citizens justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Read in this way, one can identify in the preamble to the Constitution of India three broad thematics. The ways in which we have come to create and adopt a constitution, the nature of that political act, the kind of political society or polity created, and its key goals and purposes. So we will turn to each of these and explore them at length. I trust that for many of you, you have already read this preamble, and I hope that through the rest of this session, you will come to read and reread it in new and interesting ways. Where does the Indian preamble come from? And here we now take a historical turn. The Indian freedom movement, which, as we discussed in the last session, was a broad umbrella coalition of political actors, social actors, labor unions, and so on, developed a commitment to certain core values as embodied in various proclamations of the freedom movement. The Karachi Resolution is one such proclamation that was issued by the Indian Congress, which was the leading political formation of the Indian freedom movement. The Karachi Resolution, which was adopted on the 29th of March 1931, was passed in the backdrop of three major events. Gandhi had just been released from the Salt Satyagraha, and with the Gandhi-Irwin Pact had concluded a phase of civil disobedience. There was the unfortunate execution of Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, and Sukhdev in the Kakori conspiracy case around this time, very close to the Karachi Resolution. The Karachi Resolution is very significant in that it outlines some key ideas which one can trace all the way from 1931 into the Constituent Assembly debates and the Constitution of India 1950. The first of these is the sharp and unambiguous commitment to complete independence, or what was called Purna Swaraj. Purna Swaraj commitment was not one that was continuous across the historical period of the freedom movement. There were times when the Indian freedom movement was committed to forms of freedom that might have allowed for dominion status, or might have allowed for some kind of subordinate political status within the British Empire. But here we notice in the Karachi Resolution a strong affirmation of a commitment to complete freedom. This finds its way into certain sovereign and republican commitments that we find in the preamble. The second is the Karachi Resolution commits us very clearly to fundamental rights and civil liberties. We understand that the Indian freedom movement was forged on the anvil of civil liberties because of the serious oppression of the colonial state. We know that several leaders of the freedom movement served jail time for expressing their beliefs and for protesting on the streets. But the commitment to a model of fundamental rights to protect civil liberties is a striking commitment in 1931 for the reason that the British common law tradition and English common law did not have a commitment to fundamental rights-based constitutions. Fundamental rights traditions, if at all, drew their motivation from American models of constitution making. So this second core commitment to individual fundamental rights is critical and traceable in the Karachi Resolution. Third, socio-economic goals, principles, or rights find their way into the Karachi Resolution, and we notice that these commitments start to percolate into Indian constitution making at an early stage. So the idea that India would embrace a socially progressive democracy, committed to ideas of social and economic justice, find early expression in the Karachi Resolution. This too is a remarkably salient and early recognition of the need to acknowledge social and economic democracy even before international developments like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. The Indian freedom movement is already anticipating these developments and making commitments along these lines. So the Karachi Resolution remains an important historical pit stop for us to trace the antecedents of the preamble to the Indian Constitution. I'm going to read a small portion of the Karachi Resolution to you. Mind you, the photograph is of the Constituent Assembly and later the Indian Parliament, but I'm going to read an excerpt for your attention. This Congress is of the opinion that in order to end the exploitation of the masses, political freedom must include real economic freedom of the starving millions. In order, therefore, that the masses may appreciate what Swaraj as conceived by the Congress will mean to them, it is desirable to state the position of the Congress in a manner easily understood by them. The Congress therefore declares that any constitution that may be agreed to on its behalf should include the following items, or should give the ability to the Swaraj government to provide for them. This kind of early commitment to social democracy is striking in the formation of the Indian political freedom movement, and then it is no surprise that our preamble and much of our constitution commits ourselves to similar goals. Right? It's no accident and not the accidental consequence of this or that figure in our political history. It is the function of the evolution and the history of the freedom movement taken as a whole. So the Purna Swaraj Declaration and the Karachi Resolution is a very important stepping stone before we get to the actual context of the drafting of the Indian Constitution. In the Constituent Assembly, the debate preceding the preamble was one that was organized around the Objectives Resolution. For some of you who are familiar with the debates, you will recognize that the Objectives Resolution was the first resolution moved in the Constituent Assembly as early as the 13th of December 1946. It was moved by Jawaharlal Nehru, one of the longest and most significant contributions that Nehru makes in the Constituent Assembly debates. Discerning among you will realize that Nehru's presence on the floor of the Constituent Assembly is not significant. While we do know that he was Prime Minister at the same time, was a prolific reader and commentator on the constitution making process, was a lawyer by training, He was not always on the floor of the House guiding the debates and participating in them. Nevertheless, the objectives resolution is one where he did participate, he did lead the debate, and one can get both a signature flair and impetus that Nehru often provides to political debates. Let's read a small excerpt and then tease out some of the key ideas of the objectives resolution. Nehru sought to pitch the resolution as something much more than a resolution. Let me read. It is a resolution, and yet it is something much more than a resolution. It is an undertaking with ourselves and with the millions of our brothers and sisters who live in this great country. If it is to be passed, it will be a sort of pledge that we shall have to carry out. This is Nehru while introducing the objectives resolution. Nehru's invocation of the idea of a pledge is similar to Gandhi's invocation of the talisman. Always, focus on what the poorest and the weakest person might want you to do whenever you are placed in a political dilemma as a resolution of any political doubt. For Nehru, the Constitution and the objectives resolution in particular also serves as something like a pledge. It is a short document, the preamble. It can be committed to memory. It's written in evocative poetry, something that can be recited. Right? And so Nehru seemed to think that this brief and precise quality of the preamble is something that could make it a sort of pledge. You know that some countries, like the United States of America, have a civic pledge of allegiance. India doesn't have such a recognized pledge, but arguably Nehru anticipated that the preamble could be precisely that kind of a pledge as a document. What did the objectives resolution secure? The first thing that it made extremely clear is that India would be constituted as an independent sovereign republic comprising a union of Indian states. Now, independence, sovereignty, and a republican state were discussed and a key part of the various roundtables and political discussions of the time, but by no means were a foregone conclusion. It's fair to say that independence from the British Empire was without doubt settled by the time the objectives resolution was tabled. But India need not have been a sovereign country, and there was nothing predetermined about it being a republic. These were choices that were made and presented in the objectives resolution. The second idea that Nehru presses in the objectives resolution is that the objectives resolution is an expression of the will of the people of India. Not experts, not influenced by British parliamentary practice or parliamentary ideas, but an expression of the will of the people of India, a popular expression. The third element of the objectives resolution was to set out the aims and aspirations, the fundamental values and plans for the framing of the Constitution. And here, much like the Karachi resolution, the objectives resolution establishes clearly the goals of a social, economic and political justice, an equality of status and of opportunity, freedom ensuring civil liberties, and safeguarding the rights of minorities. These sets of choices already emerge in the Objectives Resolution 1946. You will recall that when we read the preamble recently, a few minutes ago, the objectives resolution clearly anticipates and uses some of the very same phrases that one would find in the preamble. So the objectives resolution, as it was tabled one of the earliest documents and debates in the Indian constitution making, is the precursor debate to the preamble. What happened to the objectives resolution? There were extensive debates. Several members participated in it. The debates included a key and sharp concern with the absence of the Muslim League. The Muslim League had already pressed for a separate political state, but used the objectives resolution and its emphasis on a strong union and an integrated union as a wedge issue to press for partition. The Muslim League argued, and without being in the Constituent Assembly debates, that Nehru had already revealed his hand, and that by pushing these questions out of debate and out of consideration by the Constituent Assembly, made it very clear that the Constituent Assembly would not have a choice with respect to these core political values and political design decisions. The second significant debate was about the place of princely states and federalism. Several members argued that the absence of the princely states meant that this debate should not take place, that there should be no resolution passed on the goals and objectives of the Constitution till the princely states were included and participated in the Constitution. The third debate was about the rights of minorities, and members sought to clarify and confirm that India would not go down the path of building a religious state. A fourth element of significant debate was about the scope and extent of social and economic rights necessary in the Indian Constitution. As things turned out, these debates played out in particular ways. One remarkable observation one would make if one read the objectives resolution debates is the emergence of Ambedkar as a very significant participant, interpreter, and interlocutor with Nehru in shaping and framing key constitutional ideas. The objectives resolution was debated and finally adopted on the 22nd January 1947. This document, once it was settled, finds its way into the preamble of the Constitution of India. I'm going to close this section, part 1, by turning to the opening words of the preamble and try and emphasize to all of us as we read the preamble that the preamble was not a foregone conclusion. There were choices made. There were phrases chosen. Some phrases had historical antecedents. And other constitutions have chosen otherwise. And this is important to both recognize and understand. So let's take a key phrase. We, the people of India, resolved to constitute India. What does this phrase communicate to? First and foremost, we must notice that if the people of India have constituted India in a particular way, the people are the ultimate reservoir of political authority. So it is popular sovereignty and popular approval that gives the Constitution its political and legal authority. Not God, mind you, because several other constitutions, including the Constitution of South Africa that I've excerpted below for certain other reasons, invoke God in the preamble. There is no such invocation in the Indian Constitution. Secondly, we must notice that the people of India come together not as castes, communities, or religious groups. It does not read we the communities of India, or we the religions of India, religious groups of India, or we the castes of India. Please remember that it was a significant political discussion in the roundtable conferences leading up to Indian independence and otherwise, whether India was best understood to be composed of groups, group identities, whether they be of caste, community, or religion, which were far more significant than individuals. In other words, that India was not a nation of individuals, better understood as a nation of groups. The opening words of the preamble of the Constitution of India makes it very clear that that choice of individuals and not groups is one that is written into the preamble and the rest of the Constitution to follow. However, the Constitution of India did not choose to be very historically self-conscious. The Constitution could have made significant reference to the political experience of British colonialism, its oppressions, its what it had made of the Indian nation, and also acknowledged the nature of the freedom movement, its key figures, and its key values. But the preamble does not do that. Let's just pay a little bit of attention to the Constitution of South Africa or the Constitution of Nepal, 2015, to understand what a self-conscious preamble might look like. Let me read. The Constitution of South Africa, 1996, says, "We the people of India recognize the injustices of our past, honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity." This kind of preamble, while it makes no reference to the word apartheid, makes a clear historical allusion and a historical reference to the injustices of our past. It also takes note that several people have suffered, both individually and in groups, to liberate the country from the conditions of apartheid. The Indian Constitution makes no such reference to colonialism or to the sacrifices of the freedom movement. Let's turn to the Constitution of Nepal 2015. Remembering the glorious history of historical people's movements and armed struggles time and again, and the sacrifice made by people for national interest, democracy, progressive change, and recognizing the martyrs, the disappeared citizens, and the victims. Anyone who has even a passing knowledge of the recent history of Nepal would understand that this refers to the Maoist movements in Nepal which led up to the Constitution of Nepal 2015. Not many constitutions make a direct reference to people's movements and armed struggles or disappeared citizens and victims. But the Constitution of Nepal 2015, by adopting that historically self-referential mode, makes it very clear that it is a break from the past. The Indian Constitution too is a significant break from India's past. It is a break from the past of colonialism. It is a break from the past of feudalism. It is a break from the past of medievalism. It's a break from the past of a caste hidebound society towards a modern liberal society with free individuals and a state committed to social, political, and economic justice. These are not modest goals. These are in constitutionally revolutionary goals. Right? So the Indian Constitution makes a radical departure, a radical break from our historical past. But it does not do so on the express terms of the preamble or in any other provision of the Constitution. Hence, the Indian Constitution relies to a great extent on the quality of our public educational systems to reinscribe and memorialize the sacrifices of the Indian freedom movement that gave us the Constitution of India 1950, as well as the political values that are inscribed into the preamble. So I will stop here with lecture 1 and return in lecture 2 to part 2, which focuses on the key principles of the Indian state.